Good morning. Today we will do the chapter Landscape of the Soul by Nathalie Trouveroy. The author Nathalie Trouveroy is an art historian who has studied art and archaeology and has done quite a lot of research on paintings. So that explains why this essay is about painting and art in general. What has been prescribed for class 11 students. This chapter is an excerpt from her book Landscape of the Soul, Ethics and Spirituality in Chinese Painting. In this article, Nathalie contrasts Chinese art with European art and discusses how the Chinese view of art differs from the European view. Talking about painters, we are quite familiar with our own Raja Ravi Verma and M.F. Hussain or R.K. Lakshman, who are the most famous painters of India. And we also know some European painters like Picasso or Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo or Vincent van Gogh. So I have included pictures of some of the famous painters here, and I want you to identify all the painters. But we are not so familiar with the Chinese painters or the Chinese paintings as such. Though it is said that the landscape painting is considered to be the highest form of painting in China. And that is what we are going to read about in this chapter. So when you look at a European work of art or a painting done by a European artist, we can understand that the artist is trying to reproduce an actual view, as you can see in the pictures here. But a classical Chinese painting will seem to be unreal. That means it is a painting of a landscape the European painter paints, and that is what he wants the viewer to see. And he wants the viewer to see the landscape exactly as he saw it. But when a Chinese painter paints a landscape, he will incorporate more than one point of view in one painting itself. That is, he will not choose a single viewpoint. He's doing this so that people can look at it from different points of view. And it will look different to different people. And each person can have his own view based on his own experience of life. So, the Chinese artist's work will not look like a real landscape. And it will be related to inner life. So it requires the active participation of the viewer. Only then the viewer will understand what the artist or the painter was thinking. Here, the writer Nathalie Trouveroy says, the European style of painting is figurative. It just copies the object as it is. But the Chinese painter wants the viewer to understand what the painter felt while seeing the object. So, the viewer must get an idea about what the artist was thinking while doing the painting, and what he was thinking about that particular object or a situation. it is the Chinese artist's interpretation of that object. So it will not be a real copy of it. As I mentioned earlier, to explain this difference in the European and Chinese style of painting, our writer Nathalie Trouveroy has narrated some anecdotes or instances from the lives of a few artists. And that is what we read on page 34 and in the first two paragraphs of page 35. The first anecdote is about the painter Wu Daozi of China. So the writer is telling us about something that happened between Wu Daozi and the Emperor of China. And the second story is about the painter who did not draw the eye of the dragon. And the third story is about a blacksmith who impressed his girlfriend's father by painting a fly that looked realistic. The writer Nathalie has included these stories about artists with a specific purpose. She wants to reveal what each painter was trying to achieve. And it is quite clear that the Chinese painter wants the viewer to travel through the work of art. That is, the viewer should analyze and understand the significance of the painting. For this, the viewer will have to enter the mind of the artist. So the Chinese painter's drawing of a landscape represents an inner landscape. That is, his thoughts, his ideas, his spiritual and conceptual space. In the Chinese language, it is called Shan Shui, which means mountain water. And this is clearly mentioned by the author on page 36, first paragraph. When we understand the concept of Shan Shui, we will understand why the landscape is an important painting, because it has both mountain and water. On page 36, first paragraph, we read that according to the Taoist view of the universe, the mountain represents yang and the water represents yin. So first we have to understand the Chinese concept of the flow of energy, which they have defined as yin and yang. So yin and yang are both complementary because one represents the vertical flow while the other represents the horizontal flow of energy. And yin is considered to be feminine while yang is masculine. And in Taoism, they also recognize a middle void where the interaction of yin and yang takes place. That's why there will be a lot of white color or the unpainted space in a Chinese landscape painting. With this, we conclude our discussion on Chinese and European art. Here the writer has only given a brief look into the Chinese concepts of Shan Shui and the Chinese style of painting, and it is left to the reader to understand the difference between the Chinese and the European styles. Now, in the next section, we read an article by Brinda Suri, and she's throwing some light into the concept of outsider art. So let's try to find out. more about outsider art or raw art and art brut. In the next section on page 36, we read about outsider art, which is the art created by untrained artists. Art brut or raw art is a type of art made by people who are not professionals, but they do paintings or they create a sculpture with their own talent and their own understanding of art. That is, they are self-taught and they are not influenced by any classical or other schools of art. And in her article, Brinda Suri also mentions the artist Nek Chand and calls him the untutored genius because he created the world famous rock garden in Chandigarh, and that is what we see on page 37. So you can read more about it, and I don't want any one of you to get too confused with all the concepts and theories mentioned by Nathalie Trouveroy, because she's only trying to make it clear that the Chinese and European styles of painting are very different, and there is a huge difference between the Western and Eastern styles. So I hope you've got an idea about all that. So the viewer should be looking for the ideas and thoughts that created that painting, the inner view and the element of the soul that is hidden in that painting. So this is all about the landscape of the soul. So let's wind up our discussion on the landscape and the soul. As an assignment, you can write down the answers to the questions given in the text. So until we meet again, all of you take care of yourselves and have a nice day.